Hi, everybody. My name is Natalie Yeadon, and I'm one of the co-owners and CEOs with Impetus Digital. At Impetus Digital, we have built some of the best-in-class asynchronous and synchronous virtual collaboration and communication tools. We've been helping life science companies from around the world over the last 13 years do everything from virtualize their advisory boards, medical education meetings, investigator sessions, we've done all sorts of large corporate events, done training for sales reps, MSLs, and everything in between. But most importantly, at Impetus, we really believe that everything starts with a conversation. And from these big, hairy, audacious conversations with some of the digital thought leaders, provocateurs, leading edge thinkers, and leaders in the pharma industry, is that we're all can work to collectively and positively disrupt healthcare. Now, leveraging a platform like Impetus, as well as this podcast, is we're hoping to not only just start the conversation, but to actually continue it. And that's actually the reason we have our platform, is that asynchronously or synchronously, we can continue to talk and dialogue and build a consensus and really move the needle on some of the agendas that we have. So I'm really thrilled to have one of these thought leaders at the table doing a lot of really provocative things in the pharmaceutical space. And this is actually David Berg. He's actually got a very broad technical and business background. He's got over 20 years of experience managing products and engineering teams for major multinational technology companies. David has spent over 5 years working in the medical cannabis industry and has experience working in commercial cultivation as well as distribution in many countries, including Holland, Jamaica, as well as in Canada. He comes with a Bachelor of Commerce from York University, our very own in Toronto, and also has a Master's in Business Administration from the University of Windsor. He's the President and Chief Technology Officer at a company called Strainprint. He is responsible for the ongoing development of the Strainprint application, as well as all emerging analytic products. So this is a really interesting angle in the cannabis market. David works directly with the company's developers, customers, partners, physicians, and clinicians to deliver on the vision of a crowdsourced medical cannabis tracking ecosystem. So welcome, David. So happy to have you on the show.
I'm just glad you got through that mouthful of an intro. Thanks for having me.
That is wonderful. So what an interesting background, David. I mean, cannabis has kind of had a glory time, and then there was controversy, and then everybody's kind of back at it again. There's been a change of leadership in the US, which is getting people to look at things differently. Tell us a little bit about how you landed in the position that you are in the cannabis market, which still has a little bit of an interesting cachet to it. And tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are today.
Sure. That's a great way to start. So again, thanks for having me. My name's Dave. I originally started off as, I guess, a recreational cannabis user with a misspent youth, starting from the time that I was 13, and always had a relationship with cannabis personally, although a little more quietly. I got through school, ended up working on product and technology, flew around the world doing that, came back and ultimately wanted to start a family. And that's when I started looking at commercializing technologies in Canada, a little closer to home. Around that time that I did that, my second son was born with Crohn's disease. And that is an autoimmune inflammatory disease of the bowel that requires some very aggressive therapies, certainly in the state he is in. And the drugs that he's required to take are, cancer drugs for the most part, and they have a number of side effects. So I had done a fair bit of research at the time, looking into other treatments for inflammatory diseases and such, and I couldn't find any information. I went and I looked on PubMed, which is the main academic research search engine. There were about 30,000 articles, 29,000 were focused on harm. I looked at that and knew what I knew of cannabis and what it had done for me, whether it's managing anxiety or my concentration issues perhaps, and knew that I could use it functionally to very good effect. But I couldn't find enough research that would allow my son's pediatric enterologist, or gastroenterologist, I should say, to enable him to take on that therapy. And it was kind of at that time that I met my partners at Strainprint, Stephanie Karasik, Evan Karasik, Andrew Muroff, and one of our other partners, Alex Rapetsky. And we set out to design a solution to help us gather the data. So what I really saw was the opportunity to take what I had learned from building crowdsourced and large infrastructure products and bring them to the realm of cannabis. So what we've actually built is a HIPAA, PIPA, FIPA, and GDPR compliant infrastructure to enable patients to safely track their interactions with cannabis products from across Canada and North America to figure out what is working really well for them. The interesting thing you brought up earlier on was about the troughs and peaks of the industry that we've been going through. The interesting thing is when you look at that as someone that's been in business and run through a variety of cycles, you see that it is in fact cyclical. So whether you want to look at insane valuations around .com and the bust, if you want to look going back to building the railroad, there's always winners and losers, and there's always a hype cycle. So what I think has happened in North America, at least, is we've risen to the peak of that hype cycle, and the market started to question how you are actually deriving value. And when that happens and you can't back up your words with sales performance or hitting your milestones, that's when things start to fall out. So I think the last year and a half has been a lot of change. There's been a lot of consolidation, but at the same time, we're seeing phenomenal growth in terms of capabilities within the industry. I'm talking about EU GMP processors. I'm talking about the advancement of new calibrated products, and new supply chains. So while it seems like it's been very turbulent, there's been a phenomenal amount of infrastructure growth and reach out to consumers.
Love it. What a great introduction. And I love the fact, for anybody who is following investments and sort of that hype cycle, and we're kind of in one right now, and we talked about the recent short squeeze and just with GameStop and all kinds of things, and this happens to all sorts of different sectors, and including the pharmaceutical and the medical cannabis space as well. And so it is at a very interesting juncture. So where do you sort of see the industry moving in the next 5 years? Especially I think that you're seeing at least some interpretation of a little bit more leniency as it relates to the US with new presidential leadership, new opportunities, I think, for companies that are based in Canada and elsewhere. What is your predictions, or what is your company sort of analyzing and supporting is going to be what the future looks like in the next 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, we have a really interesting lens of consumer behavior and consumer use, because what we're essentially doing is we're helping people to connect them with the right products for their requirement. We're starting to see that big business. So whether you want to call that therapeutics companies, you want to call that consumer packaged goods brands, like you see companies like Molson Coors doing deals with Hexo. You see Constellation, which is an alcohol company, owning the majority of Canopy. You're seeing crossover with Canadian products moving into the US markets through various licensing schemes and vice versa. So we're starting to see a free up of trade in terms of intellectual property, brands, and what have you. We also see a lot more freedom in the US in terms of acceptance of minor cannabinoids, certainly due to the hemp bill. But it's going to take some big political change in the U.S. for things to really go in a big way, because right now each individual U.S. state is run as its own entity, if you will. So whereas in Canada we have a national program for recreational and for medical, in the US you have 50 some odd different state regulations, whether you can use, you can't, is it medical, what have you. But what is interesting is the innovation that is coming out of that. In a lot of states where they are restricted from distributing THC-based products, you're starting to see people look to chemistry to isolate other isomers of THC that can be derived from hemp. So you're starting to see talk about things like THC, it's Delta 8 THC, Delta 10, THCP, THCPO. These are isolates of THC that are allowed currently or acceptable under the current Farm Act. So we're starting to see a lot of activity in terms of product development that way in the US. In Canada, we don't see a lot of activity around those isomers because THC is legal. So a lot of the companies are staying away from it because they look at the cost of clinically vetting a molecule, and it's easier for them to pursue THC. In terms of the larger interests, so we have a variety of companies that are licensed producers across the country and across North America that are producing cannabis, processing cannabis, bringing it out to market. Now what we're starting to see is the entrance of larger pharmaceutical companies, therapeutic companies, biotechnology companies, and those CPG brands that I talked about. But what's fundamentally different about those brands is that they don't come from cannabis. They come from traditional industry where there's KPIs, there's metrics in place, they're accountable to their shareholders, and they often have very broad distribution supply chains. So think about health and beauty products like facial topicals with CBD or pain topicals. You want to go and distribute those to all the drugstores. The challenge has been up until now, a lot of those companies have been staying away from cannabis or cannabinoids because of the federal restrictions by the US. They're worried about it hampering their ability to operate. But then also they're worried about liability. They are worried about a lack of clinical evidence. So they're looking for anything that they can possibly do to stabilize a user experience, to provide transparency, and also to provide shelf stability. If you're a brand like Molson Coors, or you're a brand like a pharmaceutical brand, you're going to want to make sure that if you're delivering a product, it is the same 100% of the time. And that is an experience right now that the industry is still trying to calibrate and dial in.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes a ton of sense. Now, look, you actually brought up a lot of really important concepts in so far. And one of the things I just want to linger on a little bit is that we just need to face the reality is that a lot of us have grown up, and it's even currently, with the impression that this is a drug. Okay, mm-hmm. So there's already some negative cachet to it. And then adding on top of it, it is a lot of the legalities and the issues that have surrounded around the opioid issues and drug addictions and everything that's been going on recently with COVID-19 and drug addiction and the increasing in mental health disorders and issues around that. There's almost like there's an area of concern of getting attached to being named or misnamed when you're getting associated with something like that. How is the industry trying to overcome that negative connotation?
That's a really interesting point. I mean, I have this discussion quite frequently with pharmacists, with physicians, and and also, people that are compounding these products. The reality is that the way things are at right now, it's easier for a physician or a pharmacist to dispense a fentanyl patch than it is for them to recommend a cannabis product. Even when they are recommending cannabis products, this is certainly the case in the majority of cases. They're using measures of THC and CBD as the relevant measure of what is working and what is not. Cannabis is a lot more than that. But the reality is the research that is out there, the quality of it, the level of understanding, the way that we're taught to look at data and interaction isn't really all that friendly, not just towards cannabis, but to plant-based medicines in general. So what we're starting to see is more of a shift from a clinical approach to medicine, more to something of an osteopathic or a holistic approach to whole body, whole mind medicine. And that's what we're starting to see occur, but it's still trumped by 70 years of prohibition and lack of understanding. But I think things like the Hemp Act, the Farm Bill, I think providing access to data to doctors, like that's what we are all about. We are analyzing people's interaction with products and figuring out how and why they are responding based on the products that they're using. And it's through that observation and through the proper cultivation of that data that we're hopeful we're going to change minds.
Beautiful. Let's actually just do a little bit of a quick education on it, because I think that once you start to get into the cannabinoid realm, that's like an entire science in and of itself. Like it's a very complicated space when you're talking about the various strains and what's actually considered a cannabinoid. So I was wondering if we could spend a couple of minutes just understanding hemp and cannabis. I know that there's also some discussion about, terpenes and the whole realm of different versions of terpenes. There's THC and CBT, there's sativa and indica, all the strains and phenotypes that are associated. I realize that you can give courses on this, but is there a simple way to sort of explain this so that people understand what it is that they're seeing when they're actually getting some sort of a medically prescribed cannabis product?
Sure. There's a fundamental challenge here and a disconnect. And what the disconnect is around is that a lot of us understand what genetics are good for. If you speak to a cultivator and you ask them behind closed doors what their strains are good for, they're gonna have a good idea of where they're targeted. The reality is once you get out to market, there is no way for them to make any representations about their products. So, you talked about product genetic classification. So you have indica and you have sativa, and that used to be the state-of-the-art way people would describe the differences between cannabis. And that was really sativa is up like a satellite and indica is down like in the couch, right? So that is a misnomer, because I can show you sativas that are going to make you sleepy. I can show you indicas that are going to make you energetic. What it's really about is understanding that cannabis is personalized medicine. Each one of us has an endocannabinoid system within our bodies, and we have natural occurring cannabinoids in our body that interact with our receptors. So the human body is actually made to interface with cannabis. Where the differences lie, though, are really in the terpene formulations. If you want to think of THC, the way people typically in a recreational perspective will look at quality is, yes, there's the physical factors of the way something looks, the way it feels, it smells, if it's sticky, but the way that they typically judge quality is by THC level. So you'll have people that make claims that, oh, this strain over here is 35% THC, therefore it's a premium. And the others in the range are 12 to 18% and some in the 20s. The reality is looking at THC alone is really like saying, how much sugar is in that candy bar, right? It's not really talking about what the other components are and how they contribute. So it's in our research that we've done, and we've observed 2 million interactions. It is truly the combination of the cannabinoids and the terpenes that are used in entourage or in an ensemble that deliver an outcome. And the reality is it's going to affect everyone differently, not only individuals, but also differences between gender, differences between age band, and difference between your physiology. So it's not as turnkey as you like. So that's why when you speak to doctors, they typically say, hey, keep a journal and start low, go slower. They'll tell you something like you can eat more, but you can eat less if it's in the case of an edible. But it's really left to your own devices to see the way you interface with that product. So if you're not tracking what you're using, you really have no ability to control what your outcome is going to be. And what this is really about is taking personal responsibility for understanding the way you respond.
I love it. And so let's introduce a little bit about what makes Strainprint so interesting. And that is, you're not a cannabis company. You're not a canopy. You're not out selling medical products. You're actually selling analytics, data. Data is the new gold, and you're going to have all kinds of positive ramifications with the data that you're collecting. One of the vehicles in which Strainprint is doing this is through consumer or individual apps that are located as easily as on somebody's phone. Mm-hmm. And then being able to collect people's personal outcomes, reactions in a really fun, interactive, rewards setting environment. Can you explain a little bit about what that app environment looks like? What are you collecting? And what has the receptivity been so far on this?
Sure, I'd be happy to. We started working on the app, or we actually started about 5 years ago. We launched the app 4 years ago. And what it is it's a free journal and medical outcomes tracker that is indexed against the cannabis supply chain. So we've got right now the best coverage in Canada. So you'll find about 80 to 90% of the products that are available in the recreational and medical supply chains. So that the consumer doesn't have to enter any data. We want to make sure that if it's for sale, it's in there. And when we add it, yes, we're calling it by its funny name, like green crack, and we'll tell you who the manufacturer is and what the batch is. People really only know, like you pointed out, the genetic category. Oh, this is a sativa, and it's got this much THC and this much CBD. What we also do when we list the products is we also record and ingest the labs. That's the information that the manufacturer has to send out to a lab to verify that it is pure, free of metals, all of that other stuff. But it also reports back the chemical composition. We actually record all that chemical data in there so that we have a good picture, not of green crack, but of a chemical expression that is defined by cannabinoids and terpenes. And that's quite interesting because the cannabis plant has about 450 chems within it, and they all vary from plant to plant. So what we do is we have that side of it. So that's taken care of, we automate that. Then what we do is someone downloads the app, they create an account for themselves. We let them know that everything is anonymous. They are entering into a real world study. So we tell them we are doing academic research with this. We are doing discovery with this. And in reward for you participating and telling us about your use, we're going to provide rewards to you. We're going to help you along the way. So we built an outcomes tracker. They will come in, they'll specify their age, their gender, they will specify their medical conditions. From there, we work with physicians to figure out how to map their symptomology to their condition states. And then what we do is once we've gone through that and they set up their conditions and their symptoms, they'll go and they'll track a session, hit a button. Today it's 1:26 p.m. on Wednesday, March 24th. I'm going to track. It's then going to bring up my list and say, what are you tracking for? Well, I'm tracking for knee pain. How bad is it? 1 out of 10, it's about a 7. What product are you taking? That's where it's going to go and look and say, okay, what products does Dave Berg have? Oh, I'm going to select Pink Kush from Canna Farms. It's going to then know, okay, Dave picked the flower. So then it's going to ask me about how I'm going to take it. So it might ask me, are you going to vape it in a flower vape? Are you going to have a joint? Or are you going to bake it into an edible? I'll tell the system. I will then tell it how much I took. If I'm taking a joint, I took 6 hits off the joint and it was a half a gram. It will then wait for about 20 minutes if I smoked it. If I digested it, it's going to wait 90. So if I'm going to take an oil or an edible. At the end of that period, it's going to prompt me and send me a push notification and say, hey, Dave, how's your knee pain now on that same scale? So I'll rate it. And then I'll also provide feedback about the way I feel. That's what we call emotives. So that can be everything from I'm happy, I'm dreamy, I'm aroused, I've got dry mouth, I've got red eyes, or I've got a racing heart. So it goes from positive outcome down to potentially adverse outcome. So at the end of that experience, the patient or consumer receives what we call strain points. So every time they interact on the system, we reward them for doing so. They can accumulate those points and redeem them for all sorts of things like t-shirts, grinders, vaporizers. Over COVID, we have been providing access to things like Amazon and Walmart gift cards to help out people that need a little bit of extra cash for their families. We also allow them to donate points to veterans or the Last Prisoner Project. And then, of course, the other thing we're doing them is we're telling them what is working for them and what is not in a very easy to understand way. If they want recommendations, what I can do is we have an area in the app called Explore. And what it'll do is it'll say, okay, well, I am a male in my 40s. I have identified that I'm treating arthritis in my knees. What other products might someone like me use in certain circumstances? So we have the ability to match people with products that are relevant to their age and cohort. All of that is mixed into a free app. And we've done those, we've analyzed 2 million interactions like that. So we've actually built the largest real world evidence data set in the world. It's over 90 million data points, and it's been structured for machine learning, and we are using it for a variety of decision support applications.
I love it. There's so much there, and what a brilliant tool, and one of its kind. So tell us a little bit about some of the smart algorithms that are built in this, because obviously the more data that your system gets, the smarter it becomes. And I'm assuming that its predictions or the outcomes or the recommendations get better. I'm also just wondering where else the AI fits into that. And the corollary to that question is there a social component to the app, i.e., if I'm looking for other people of similar condition or age group or geography, can I find other people, and can there be competitions with points and things like that? So it's a two-pronged question there.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we differentiate ourselves from other apps out there as being medically focused. So while we do provide loyalty, we're really focused on the quality of data that we're capturing, not the quantity. So a lot of the AI that we are deploying is actually, and this is all done anonymously, so we do not look at anyone individually, is we're looking at treatment behaviors, identifying dosing based on age, based on cohort, based on symptom. Like you have to understand in terms of the symptoms that we look at. When we look at joint pain as an example, we're looking at 120,000 interactions. When we look at muscle pain, we're looking at the interactions from 110,000 people. Anxiety is over 100,000 interactions, insomnia. And then we can stratify those into groups. We can stratify them into geographies. We can look at the difference between products and their impact on outcome. So a lot of our AI that we put in there is looking at treatment behavior. It is looking at, when identifying the larger data set, it's what are the key drivers that are responsible for driving these outcomes and how can they be delivered to better effect? So a lot of this research is actually also done with academics. We've published 6 peer-reviewed journal articles in the Journal of Affective Disorder and Journal of Pain on everything from stress, depression, anxiety, to palliative care, to headaches and migraines, PTSD, fibromyalgia, and a wealth of other conditions. We're tracking 300 different medical conditions. So while we do reward them for points, we don't necessarily want them to have a competition like who's using more. We want to focus on mindful medication and doing what's right for the consumer. But that being said, the whole idea of being social in this space is very difficult, especially because you've got parties like Facebook. You've got things in the US like the Patriot Act that make it difficult to have confidential or free discussions about controlled substances. In fact, it's restricted or frowned upon. So we've built a community platform to enable people to have that conversation, where you'll actually see most of the really interesting discussion going on is actually in Reddit these days. So I think it's a companion. We don't want people to have to geek out to use this. This is designed for a young person just as much as it's designed for a baby boomer that is looking to cut down on the amount of medications they're taking.
Yeah, I love it. It's beautifully said and great response on that. So tell us a little bit about the business model for Strainprint. So you're an analytics company. So
Yep.
There's a lot of different players who could potentially benefit from the data that you're accumulating, everything from the growers and the retailers to clinicians, people doing clinical studies, right up to like research and policymakers.
Mm-hmm.
How ultimately is the app, is your company basically financialized, and how do you get reimbursed for the work and the data that you're producing?
Sure. First of all, the app itself is always free to consumers. We don't charge for loyalty. We don't charge for anything like that. Whenever you're gathering data, there's a cost of acquisition. So we looked at it in terms of where do we spend our money, and rather than spend it on marketing, we'd rather reward the individual. In terms of the way we monetize, we've built a variety of interfaces on top of the Strainprint app. These are web-based interfaces that allow researchers, clinicians, doctors, and regulators to view the data, and that's called our analytics platform. So within the app, what we can actually do is we have the concept of activation codes. So in the app, if you are requested to do so, you can go and punch in a code in the menu. And what it'll do is it'll transform the app to basically a custom study. So we've done these studies with LPs across the country. We are working with brands like Move in Florida. We're working with brands like Viva. We've done work with Cannabis. We've done work with Cannafarms, Emblem, a whole bunch across the board. And they are all using the data and accessing it through the interface, and they will pay to have access to the data. And the interface gives them the ability to ask all sorts of questions about the data. It's a business intelligence platform. And I should also mention that regulators such as Health Canada also use the platform to analyze high-level interaction and behaviors of patients across the country. So it's used by regulators to understand. It's used by physicians to track the success of their patients' treatments when activated. We regularly invite people into specific studies, like we've been doing research on endometriosis. We are doing a variety of oncology-focused studies. And that is really how we monetize. The other exciting thing that's come out of this, a silver lining out of COVID, if you will, was that we had the time to really go back and look at the data and start putting some advanced analysis into it. And what's come out of that is we built a formulation business. So what we have the ability to do now is to go to a consumer packaged goods brand, or to go to a therapeutic provider or a health and beauty provider or a pharmaceutical company and explain to them through data how to build a proper formulation for a specific purpose. So we've done that across a variety of oncology targets. We've built products for PTSD, fibromyalgia, depression, anxiety, sleep. We have also built products for the beverage industry where you want to modulate mood, right? They're not concerned about making my knee pain better or making my headache go away. They want to make sure that, gee, if Molson Canadian is a beer and it has this, and Stella Artois is a beer and has that, they both have different brand identities, to borrow two beer brands. Those companies, so consumer packaged goods companies, they want to have a consistent brand experience, right? Like Red Bull gives you wings. It's going to give you energy and make you fly. You want to be able to apply those same concepts to cannabis products. We enable you to formulate in such a way that you can do that. So that is by understanding what are the terpenes that you need, what are the major cannabinoids, what are the minor cannabinoids, what is the right amount of that product that should be rendered to you at the right bioaccessible level. So there's a whole bunch of interesting things coming around, especially as edibles come online and therapeutics. It's a fun time for discovery.
I love it. What a brilliant, and again, we probably could talk for hours about that, but it's just a brilliant way to do that. And I really, I'm sure that this is things that your team has been investigating as well, but there's a ton of work going on right now around precision medicine. Mm-hmm. And if we think about the various strains and formulations and mixtures of a little of this and a little of that to give you this type of mood and a little of that to give you some positive impact on hip pain or whatever, ultimately the question comes down to is there an opportunity to use smart algorithms, machine learning, or leveraging things like liquid biopsies or other types of biomarkers or testing potentially being done right, from a phone or through ambient biometrics or what have you, to be able to collect specific symptomology, conditions, whatever, something that might be really specific to your own personal chemistry, and be able to line that up using smart algorithms to be able to ascertain what is going to be the best mix. So even if a company does formulate something, is there an even uber specialization or modification for that particular individual's dosage or what have you? What is the world of diagnoses or diagnostics, precision medicine, or some of these biomarkers look like in the cannabis market?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. It's young, but it follows the same path as traditional medicine. So what you're starting to see is there's a variety of providers out there that are providing pharmacogenetic testing. So think about 23andMe, right? These vendors, and there's a handful, there's probably about 5 or 10 of them in North America that are really good at it. And what they do is they take a saliva swab test and you send it and they'll analyze it, and then they'll look at genetic variants and they'll look at your predisposition towards certain drugs or things like cannabis. And what they tell you about is shockingly true about yourself. In terms of what products you would interact well with, what you wouldn't, should you stay away from beta blockers, should you take a beta blocker? Are you a high cannabis metabolizer or THC metabolizer? If so, what does that mean? Do you have a predisposition towards addiction or psychosis? There's all sorts of tools that are out there that if the consumer wants to really understand their body and the way that it responds to various compounds and molecules, it's freely available. The challenge is that currently, just like cannabis, where it's not covered by insurance, none of these tests are covered by insurance either. So the Impetus relies on the consumer to go and spend $200 or $300 to go and get a pharmacogenetic test to understand how their body responds to different drugs. And then they have to make that personal connection. So while the tools are there, the adoption of those tools is unfortunately not as far along as we had hoped. Now on the other side, we just released a new version of the app about 4 weeks ago. The Strainprint app has been rebuilt from top to bottom on native platforms. And the reason why we did that was we want to improve the way that we're able to track data when in a study. So your phone has all sorts of things like step counters. It has heart rate monitors or pulse sensing. It has all of these sensors. So we've actually built the next version of Strainprint that you can download today so that it can take advantage of those functions. So you're gonna see in the next year coming from us smarter analysis, whereby if someone is treating for knee pain, let's look at when they use the cannabis products. Did the use of that product actually result in them traveling further and making more steps in that day? Did they climb more stairs as a result? What is the cause and effect that's going on? So we're always looking for ways to improve the quality of the data, because ultimately, when we're looking at variables, we want to have as many as we can to inform our decision.
Wow, I love the fact that you're making it interoperable. And again, working in an ecosystem of other sort of wearables and making this a much more cohesive and very seamless way of gathering data without people having to actually enter it in. So it seems like it's going to be a really effective tool in terms of accumulation of data. Of course, all of this results in some fantastic reports that a lot of your clients can probably leverage and use and capitalize on in future studies, discovery and innovation, competitive overviews, et cetera. Tell us a little bit about what your company has discovered on polypharmacy, how people are kind of mixing and melding various things, self-treatment, self-medication, and what does that world look like?
Yeah, I mean, we did a study about a year ago. We went out and we sent a survey out to our users. It was amazing. Within 24 hours, we had 1,000 responses. So one of the things that I really love about the consumers that are on our platform is that they have a vested interest in wanting to do better, and they see cannabis as a way to do that. So they really want to share their experience. So we went back to a bunch of those users and we asked them about their polypharmacy relationships, about the concomitant medications they were taking, and how things have changed with the use of cannabis. And it's amazing to see that once people integrate cannabis as a therapy into their lives, specifically around autoimmune disorders, around pain and inflammation, around stress, depression, anxiety, and sleep, we see an incredible switchover where some 60% of the people that we queried have either stopped or dramatically reduced the use of competing molecular drugs in favor of cannabis. The other thing that you hear about, which is always amazing to hear, is when you look at elderly patients that are taking 5, 10, 15 medications in some cases, where they're taking a drug to counteract a side effect of another drug that counteracts another side effect, and they stack it. When these patients go under the care of a physician that is helping them with the cannabinoid therapy, it's not unusual to see them drop 5 or 6 molecular drugs as a result of using cannabinoid therapy. I'm not saying that it's a magical cure or a Swiss Army knife. I'm just saying it's pretty amazing the response that patients are seeing holistically and all over the place.
Very interesting. We're just emerging out of one of the most tumultuous times that we could ever probably imagine in most of our current history, which was just this confluence of stuff, not just COVID, but social unrest and political disease and all sorts of things just happening at the same time. And this has obviously impacted so many people's lives, specifically on the mental wellness aspect of things, addiction. It's affected a lot of people's sleep. I mean, a lot of people already are affected by, having insomnia in general. But I was just wondering if you could share any of the data that you have accumulated over the last year or beyond, or maybe even some comparison in terms of segmenting time periods, about how cannabinoids or cannabis therapies are affecting or helping or hindering people's insomnia or other sleep disorders.
Sure. Why don't we look at this in general? So if I were, and I just have a screen up to my side here, so mind my wandering eyes. So if I were to look back about a year and a half ago, and this was before all the funny business started happening and everything else. If I look at the top symptoms that are treated, we would see that joint pain is the number one thing that consumers are treating with cannabis, followed by muscle pain, followed by anxiety, followed by insomnia, depression, and inflammation. So like those are the top six. If I were to go, let's go back about 180 days. Now what we're seeing in terms of treatment behavior, the top treated symptom is anxiety. The top symptom on the system, the top treated symptom network-wide is anxiety. Followed by, interesting, I was very interested by this, lower back pain. So people sitting around, people being immobile, people being frustrated with their situation are resulting in back pain. The next one is joint pain, again, tied to lack of mobility and getting out there. Followed by depression, and then insomnia is still in spot number 5. And then we start seeing muscle pain, stress, we see irritability creep up there, and headache as well. The other thing that's interesting is who is treating. So typically we see the sweet spot in terms of people that are tracking on the platform with about, I would say they have about 50% of the data set would be consumers between the ages of 28 and 47. Where we have seen the largest growth is in patients over the age of 48. So we're starting to see a lot of consumers that would have stayed away. Maybe they're at home, maybe they don't have to worry about being in the office, maybe they have, I don't know what their circumstances are, but we're seeing a lot of elders, late baby boomers, Gen Xers, that are really starting to take cannabis more seriously and start to sample it more. And then, while there's a lot of use in the younger demographic in 18 to 27, they are recreational users. And while we do track recreational sessions for mood modulation, that's not really the sweet spot of who would be on our app.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. I love the statistics. Really quickly, I was just curious, and I'm sure so many other people listening to this are as well, have you seen, or has the market seen an inflection point in terms of the utilization or the prescribing of cannabis products since COVID-19? I was just curious if there's some sort of a tracking system, if your app has picked that up, and if you've also seen an insurgence of usage of your app since COVID.
So yeah, I guess first of all, in terms of the use of the app, we've seen a dramatic uptake in terms of use. Specifically, not just in Canada, but also in the US. One of the largest growing markets for us right now is Florida. And we are actually, to give you an idea of one of the ways we're using the data was we took anonymized data from Florida patients, and the state is looking to cap THC to 10% in the state. So we actually took the data that we had gathered from patients in Florida. We summarized it in a way to prove to the legislature that the THC should not be capped, and to provide them with an overview of the way it's used and what the risk profiles are of it. So we're starting to see the data to be mobilized in different ways, and that's to help regulators. We've also seen growth in the regions in which we're tracking. So we have tracking set up for South Africa. We are in the midst of deploying nationally in Australia. And you'll also see a new version of the app coming out in Israel over the next year. The new version of the app, by the way, is multi-language enabled. So assuming laws permit, we can provide it in French, Italian, German, Spanish, Portuguese, and soon Hebrew. So we're really looking at the difference in regionality. In terms of growth, we've seen more consumers come onto the platform in the last year than we have in the first 3 years of our operation.
Wow. Yeah, it really says something about it, doesn't it? Also, would love to get some of your perspective on the newest market, which is imminently going to hopefully be approved, for many people who are waiting for this, is really around the edibles market. Gummies, baked goods, people getting into the drinks formulations, sort of competing with the wines and the alcohols of the world. What is that all going to look like?
I mean, you're starting to see it shake out, right? In the beverage industry, I mean, you have these large beverage manufacturers that are coming in. You also have tobacco players that are coming in because they're used to working within a regulated market to scale. I think the whole edibles thing and beverage market in Canada has been a challenge to roll out. Frankly, there are more advanced markets in the US, looking at like California and Colorado, looking at Oklahoma. I mean, realistically, we had supply chain issues as an industry. We had a lot of turbulence over the last year and a half with LPs substantially downsizing, consolidating, or disappearing. And then in between this and all of this COVID craziness, you've had all these processors. So these are contract manufacturers that have expertise in extraction technologies, in packaging, in building creams, topicals, and making sure that when you're making chocolate, it's tempered the right way so it actually snaps like a right piece of chocolate, right? And the industry has had a real challenge adopting the food science alongside the cannabis regulations, because they're two different regulatory bodies, at least in Canada. There's standards that you have to adhere to, and getting licensed and approved and all of that has been frankly challenging for a lot of the providers, the processors. So I think it's held it back a little. But understanding where product portfolios are going, because a lot of the folks that we're talking about, we assist them with their formulations for their brands. Version 3 products, there's a lot of cool stuff going on, and it's all about calibrated, consistent, stable experience.
Love it. It is brilliant. And I guess stay tuned for the next rendition of this channel so we can hear all about it. Just really quickly at the very top of this hour, just to finish this off, is lots of controversy, I'm sure, still about this topic. You'll probably still have a lot of concerned parents, concerns around addiction, getting addicted to drugs. You hear this a lot. All of the other, concerns associated with the usage of drugs. And now you're starting to talk about like hard drugs. Where do you divide the line? You also start talking about a lot of therapeutic drugs, like the use of ayahuasca and other, LSD and other forms being used in clinical trials. And so there's this whole movement going on, and almost like this faction of like, it's a split view on it. How do you sort of tend to people who have this real over exuberance concern around addiction, and this is terrible, and society is getting led down this rabbit hole that we're never going to be able to get out of, and getting to a point where we're starting to talk about legalizing drugs, and you know, is this going to open the doors to crime? And then there's this whole discourse that's going on. And how would you respond to those concerns?
Well, I mean, if you look statistically at what happens to crime when when dispensaries, when you have a legal program and what have you, what you actually see is you actually see the inverse in terms of crime with dispensaries. There's been a variety of studies around that, but I mean, in terms of addiction, if you have a predisposition towards addictive behaviors, like if you have a gambling addiction, if you might be an alcoholic, if you might have trouble, then you're gonna have challenges with any substance, whether that is psychotropic or not. I think there's a lot of fear mongering that goes on around cannabis. People think that it rots your brain. But in reality, if you look at the research, there are cannabinoids and compositions that are anti-mutagenic, they're anti-carcinogenic, they're anti-mutagenic, they're anti-inflammatory. And when you compare the side effects or perceived side effects of cannabis-based therapies relative to molecular drugs, it's quite shocking. The difference is that people just take the word of the doctor or the drug company for, you know, as, oh, it's okay. You know, as we listen to those commercials about, you know, may cause sleepiness, may cause drowsiness, may cause growth of a fourth limb. You know, like you're perfectly willing to do that because you're trained to think that's okay. But I think what's happening is there's a fundamental shift in the way a lot of the new practitioners or new physicians that are coming out that are looking at medicine as a whole mind and body thing, all encompassing. Like we talked about the approach of an osteopath versus an MD. There's a lot of education and change going on right now, but it's not going to change overnight. You know, the ridiculous thing is you look at those products, look at alcohol. Alcohol you can get in the gas station, you can get in the supermarket, you can go to a specialty store, and it's regularly accepted. And here's a hint, if you drink a lot, it's going to kill you, right? If you have a lot of cannabis, you know what's going to happen? You're probably going to fall asleep. And then you're going to wake up, right? So, I mean, yes, there's risk profiles, right? There's risk profiles with anything you do, but an understanding of interaction and the way it benefits people, that's what's key. So that's really why we're here, right?
Absolutely.
You know, the only way to understand is to get, you know, we're patients for patients.
For sure. On that note, David, this was a fascinating discussion. Like I said, it'll be very interesting to maybe reconnect in another year or two and see what a lot of this longer term data is going to prove out on these very important points. For anybody who's interested in connecting with David, with their company, to find out more about how you can get and gather some of these analytics, get onto their dashboard, we will be leaving his contact information in our show notes. I also encourage you to check out impetusdigital.com. If you were interested in this conversation, if you're a grower, a retailer, if you're a clinician, somebody doing clinical studies, even a regulator, if you're wanting to get stakeholders around the table to have these conversations, reaching a consensus on policy, documentation, protocol, clinical trial protocols, that's what we do at Impetus. We bring stakeholders together to solve problems asynchronously and synchronously through our virtual platform. Please like and subscribe. We would love to hear from you if you have any questions. Thank you for joining our meeting today. And thank you so much, David, for a really inspiring conversation, and wishing everybody a wonderful day ahead.